I took my fiance's laptop in for repair. The technician locked the door and whispered, "Cancel the wedding and change the locks right now." Confused, I asked, "Why are you saying that?" He opened a hidden folder. "What I saw in those photos made my blood run cold. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought a simple laptop repair would change everything." The morning started like any other Tuesday in our quiet Denver suburb. Claire had left early for her marketing job, kissing my cheek and mumbling something about a client presentation. Her silver Dell laptop sat on the kitchen counter, the screen flickering with that annoying blue light that meant trouble. "The screen keeps going black," she had said the night before, frustration evident in her voice. "I can't afford to lose my work files right now." I offered to take it to TechFix, the small repair shop downtown that had helped me with computer issues before. Claire hesitated for a moment, her fingers drumming against the granite countertop, but then smiled and handed me the power cord. "You're a lifesaver, Patrick. Just make sure they don't go through my personal files, okay?" The request seemed reasonable. Everyone has private documents they don't want strangers seeing. I promised her I would mention it to the technician and left it at that. TechFix occupied a narrow storefront between a coffee shop and a dry cleaner. The familiar smell of electronic components and metal polish hit me as I walked in, carrying Claire's laptop in my worn leather messenger bag. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across shelves lined with dismantled computers and tangled cables. Dave Rodriguez, the owner, looked up from behind the counter. We had developed a comfortable rapport over the years. He was maybe 55, with graying hair and the patient demeanor of someone who had spent decades solving other people's technology problems. "Patrick, what brings you in today?" I set the laptop on the counter. "Claire's machine. Screen keeps cutting out." Dave nodded, opening the laptop and pressing the power button. The Dell logo appeared, flickered, then went black. He tried again with the same result. "Probably a loose connection in the display cable. Should be a straightforward fix. Give me about 2 hours?" "Perfect. I'll grab lunch and come back." I handed him my business card with my cell phone number and left. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of burning leaves from somewhere in the neighborhood. I spent the time running errands, completely unaware that my life was about to take a devastating turn. When I returned to TechFix at 2:30, something felt different. Dave looked up as the door chimed, but instead of his usual friendly greeting, his expression was serious, almost troubled. "Patrick, we need to talk." My stomach tightened. "Is the laptop beyond repair?" He glanced around the empty shop, then walked to the front door and turned the deadbolt. The click echoed in the small space. The hardware issue was simple. Loose display cable, just like I thought. But while I was testing the system to make sure everything worked properly, I found something else. Dave led me to his workstation in the back corner. Claire's laptop sat open, the screen now working perfectly. But what I saw displayed made my blood run cold. "I have to run diagnostic software on every machine that comes through here," Dave explained, his voice lower now. "Sometimes it picks up deleted files, corrupted data, things like that. Usually it's just work documents or family photos, but this..." The screen showed a folder labeled P Documentation. Inside were dozens of files with names like Bank Statements July, Personal Calls Transcribed, and Daily Routine. Notes. My hands began to shake. "What is this?" Dave clicked on one of the photo files. It opened to reveal a picture of me sleeping in my own bed, taken from what must have been the doorway of our bedroom. The timestamp showed it was from last week. "There are more," Dave said quietly. He showed me photos of documents from my home office, bank statements, insurance papers, even copies of correspondence with my lawyer about estate planning. Someone had photographed these when I wasn't home, and that someone had access to my house. "Dave, I don't understand. Why would Claire..." "Look at this one." He opened another file. It was a photograph of my father's old leather portfolio, the one I kept locked in my desk drawer. The portfolio contained documents related to the inheritance I had received after his death 17 years ago, property deeds, investment account information, and the details of a trust fund he had established. I sank into the chair beside Dave's workstation, my mind racing. Someone has been in my house going through my private things. Not someone, Dave said gently. The metadata on these photos shows they were all taken with the camera built into this laptop. Claire's laptop. The words hit me like a physical blow. My fiancée, the woman I had trusted with everything, had been systematically documenting my private life without my knowledge. But why? There's more, Dave continued, his expression growing more concerned. Audio files. He clicked on a folder labeled Conversations. Inside were dozens of audio files with dates and times. Dave selected one from 3 days ago and pressed play. My own voice filled the small repair shop. The trust fund matures next year. It'll be worth about $400,000 by then, plus the house appreciates every year. Then Claire's voice. That's wonderful, honey. Your father really provided well for you. It was a conversation we had during dinner, one where I thought I was simply sharing financial information with my future wife. Now, hearing it played back in this context, it felt like evidence being gathered for some unknown purpose. She's been recording your private conversations, Dave said. Personal stuff about your finances, your family, your daily routines. Patrick, this isn't normal relationship behavior. This is surveillance. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. The woman I planned to marry in 6 months, the person I shared my bed with every night, had been treating me like a subject under investigation. Why would you show me this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dave closed the laptop and looked directly at me. Because I've seen this before. About 3 years ago, a woman brought in her boyfriend's computer. Same type of files, same systematic documentation. Turned out she was a private investigator hired by his ex-wife to gather evidence for a custody battle. The repair shop suddenly felt too small, too warm. I loosened my tie, trying to steady my breathing. You think Claire is investigating me? I think someone hired her to investigate you, Dave said carefully. The question is who and why. I thought about the past few months, searching for signs I might have missed. Claire's questions about my family history, her interest in my financial planning, the way she sometimes seemed to be listening to my phone calls even when she appeared to be watching television. What should I do? Dave handed me a flash drive. I copied everything onto this before I called you. Don't let her know you've seen any of it. Act normal until you figure out what's really going on. I pocketed the drive, my hands still trembling slightly. And the laptop? I'll tell her the repair took longer than expected. Give you some time to think. As Dave unlocked the front door, he placed a hand on my shoulder. Patrick, be very careful. People who go to this much trouble to gather information about someone usually aren't planning anything good. I walked out of TechFix into the late afternoon sunlight, but everything looked different now. The familiar streets of my neighborhood felt foreign, threatening. I had entered that repair shop as a man with a simple computer problem. I was leaving as someone whose entire world had been turned upside down. The drive home took forever. Every red light gave me more time to think, to question everything I thought I knew about my relationship with Claire. How long had this been going on? What did she plan to do with all that information? And most importantly, who was paying her to spy on me? When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the house I had called home for the past 8 years. The white colonial with its blue shutters and well-maintained garden had always represented security and stability. Now it felt like a stage set where I had been performing unknowingly for an audience I couldn't see. I climbed the 3 steps to my front porch, keys jangling on the military-style keychain my father had given me years ago. As I unlocked the front door, I wondered if Claire was already inside, waiting to ask about her laptop repair, but the house was empty, filled only with the familiar sounds of settling wood and the hum of the refrigerator. I walked through the rooms I knew so well, seeing them now through different eyes. Had she photographed things in the living room too? Had she been through my bedroom dresser, my closet, my bathroom medicine cabinet? The violation felt complete and absolute. This wasn't just about broken trust. This was about someone systematically invading every aspect of my private life, for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. I climbed the stairs to my home office, each step on the hardwood floor creaking in the familiar pattern I had known for years. My father's leather portfolio sat in the locked drawer where I always kept it. I pulled it out and opened it, running my fingers over the documents inside. These papers represented everything he had worked for, everything he had left me to build a secure future. Now someone was using that information against me, and the person I trusted most was the one gathering it. I spent that entire evening moving through my own house like a stranger, hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. When Claire's key turned in the front door at 7:15, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the newspaper spread in front of me, trying to appear normal. "Hey, honey," she called out, her voice carrying the usual warmth that had once comforted me. Now it sounded calculated, performed. "Hey yourself, how was the presentation?" Claire appeared in the kitchen doorway, setting her purse on the granite countertop. She wore her navy blue blazer, the one she saved for important client meetings, and her blonde hair was pulled back in the professional style she preferred for work. "It went well, really well, actually. We might land the Morrison account." She kissed my cheek, and I had to force myself not to flinch. "How did the laptop repair go?" I looked up from the newspaper, meeting her eyes. "Still working on it. Dave said it might take until tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" A flash of something crossed her face. Concern? Annoyance? Did he say what was wrong with it? "Display cable issue. Nothing major, just time-consuming to fix properly." Claire nodded, but I noticed her fingers drumming against the counter again, that nervous habit she had when something was bothering her. "I hope he's being careful with my files." I mentioned that to him. He's a professional. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. I have some important client information on there." I watched her move around the kitchen, preparing her usual evening herbal tea. Everything looked the same as always, but now I was analyzing every gesture, every word, searching for deception. The woman I had planned to marry in 6 months was a stranger performing the role of my loving fiancé. "Patrick, are you okay? You seem distracted." "Just tired. Long day at the construction site." That night I lay in bed, listening to Claire's breathing, wondering how many times she had photographed me sleeping. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. when I finally gave up on sleep and crept downstairs to my office. I closed the door quietly and turned on the desk lamp, then pulled out the flash drive Dave had given me. My hands shook slightly as I inserted it into my personal computer. The files appeared on screen, a catalog of my private life laid out like evidence in a court case. I spent the next 3 hours going through everything systematically. There were photos of bank statements dating back 8 months, screenshots of text messages I had sent to my lawyer about updating my will, even pictures of my daily calendar showing my work schedule and personal appointments. But it was the audio files that disturbed me most. Claire had been recording our conversations for months, carefully documenting every time I mentioned money, property, or family history. I listened to myself discussing the trust fund my father had established, the value of our house, even my thoughts about retirement planning. In one recording from 6 weeks ago, I heard myself telling Claire about my first marriage to Margaret and the financial settlement we had reached during the divorce. "She wanted half of everything," my recorded voice explained. "But since the inheritance came after our divorce was finalized, she had no legal claim to it. Still makes her angry, though." Claire's response on the recording was sympathetic. "That must have been difficult for you. Do you think she's still resentful about the money?" At the time, I had appreciated her interest in my past. Now her questions seemed designed to extract specific information, but information for whom? I closed the laptop and sat back in my father's old desk chair, staring at the framed photograph on the wall. It showed him and me at my college graduation, both of us smiling broadly. He had been so proud that day, talking about the future he was helping to secure for me through careful financial planning. "I want to make sure you never have to worry about money the way I did when I was young," he had told me that day. "This inheritance will give you choices, son, real freedom." Now someone was using his gift to me as a weapon, and I didn't understand why. The next morning I called in sick to work and spent the day researching private investigators in the Denver area. If Dave was right about Claire being hired by someone, there might be a paper trail. But after hours of searching online directories and making discreet phone calls, I found nothing that connected her to any investigative agencies. Around noon, my phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach dropped. My ex-wife and I hadn't spoken in over 2 years, not since she had tried to contest my father's will in court. "Patrick, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Her voice was carefully neutral, the tone she used when she wanted something. "Margaret, this is unexpected. I was hoping we could talk. There are some things about our divorce settlement that I think we should revisit." I gripped the phone tighter. "The settlement was finalized 18 years ago. There's nothing to revisit." "Circumstances change, Patrick. I've been talking to a lawyer, and there might be some irregularities in how certain assets were disclosed." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "The inheritance from your father. There's a question about whether it was properly reported during our proceedings." I stood up from my desk chair, pacing to the window. "Margaret, the inheritance came 3 years after our divorce was final. You know that. But the trust fund was established while we were still married. My lawyer thinks that creates a gray area." "Your lawyer is wrong." There was a pause. Then Margaret's voice took on a sharper edge. "We'll see about that. I think you'll find that I have more information about your financial situation now than I did back then." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Margaret's timing couldn't be coincidental. She was talking about having new information about my finances at the exact same time that someone was systematically documenting every aspect of my financial life. I thought about Claire's questions over the past few months, her interest in my family history, her curiosity about my first marriage. She had seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me better, but now I wondered if she had been gathering ammunition for Margaret's legal challenge. That afternoon, I drove back to TechFix. Dave looked up as I entered, and his expression immediately grew concerned. "Patrick, I wasn't expecting you back so soon. I need to ask you something. Yesterday, you said you'd seen this kind of surveillance before. Can you tell me more about that case?" Dave glanced around the empty shop, then gestured for me to follow him to the back workstation. "The woman I mentioned, she brought in her boyfriend's computer about 3 years ago. Same type of files, same systematic documentation. She claimed she was worried he was cheating on her, but the scope of the surveillance was way beyond that." "What happened?" "About a week later, the boyfriend came in asking about the same computer. Said his girlfriend had taken it for repair. When I told him what I'd found, it turned out she had been hired by his ex-wife to gather evidence for a custody modification hearing." My worst fears were being confirmed. "Did the ex-wife win her case?" "Yes and no. The surveillance gave her ammunition, but it also backfired when the court found out about the deceptive tactics. The judge was not pleased." Dave opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recording device. "Look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but if someone is building a case against you, you need to protect yourself. Document everything, record conversations, create your own evidence trail." I took the device, feeling its weight in my palm. "You think I should spy on the person who's spying on me? I think you should be prepared to defend yourself against whatever's coming." That evening, Claire returned home at her usual time, but something felt different. She was more attentive than usual, asking detailed questions about my day, my work, my plans for the weekend. Her interest felt forced, like an actress who was trying too hard to sell her performance. "The laptop should be ready tomorrow," I told her as we sat down to dinner. "Dave called this afternoon." "Oh, good. I really need it back." She paused, cutting her chicken with precise movements. "Patrick, can I ask you something?" "Sure." Have you ever thought about what would happen to your father's trust fund if something happened to you? I mean, who would inherit it? The question hit me like ice water. Why would you ask that? Claire's cheeks flushed slightly. I just wondered. We're getting married soon, and I thought maybe we should discuss our financial futures more openly. I studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. The trust goes to my estate. Since I don't have children, it would be distributed according to my will. And your will leaves everything to you after we're married. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth now. Claire, why are you asking about this? She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound morbid. I guess I've just been thinking about our future together, and I want to make sure I understand everything. I squeezed back, forcing a smile. We can review all the financial stuff with my lawyer before the wedding if you want. That would be great. But as we finished dinner, I noticed Claire glancing at her phone repeatedly, as if she were waiting for an important message. When it finally buzzed, she excused herself to the bathroom, taking the phone with her. I sat alone at our kitchen table, surrounded by the remnants of a meal that had tasted like cardboard, and realized that I was living with someone who was systematically betraying me for reasons I still didn't fully understand. The woman I loved was leading a double life, and tomorrow I would have to decide whether to confront her or continue pretending that everything was normal while I figured out her true agenda. Either choice felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. But one thing was becoming clear. Margaret's phone call hadn't been a coincidence, and Claire's surveillance wasn't just curiosity. Someone was building a case against me, and the person sleeping next to me every night was gathering the evidence they needed to destroy everything my father had worked to leave me. The laptop sat on the kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. Claire had picked it up from TechFix that morning, thanking me profusely for handling the repair. She seemed relieved to have it back, immediately checking her files and muttering about catching up on work. I watched her every move, the recording device Dave had given me feeling heavy in my pocket. Everything look okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Perfect. Dave did a great job. She closed the laptop and smiled at me. I'll be working late in the office tonight. Big presentation tomorrow. After she left for work, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the morning newspaper without reading a word. Margaret's phone call the day before kept replaying in my mind. Her comment about having more information about my financial situation felt like a threat, especially now that I knew someone had been systematically documenting every aspect of my economic life. I decided to call my lawyer, Robert Chen, who had handled both my father's estate and my divorce from Margaret. If she was planning some kind of legal challenge, he would need to know about it. Patrick, good to hear from you. Robert's voice was warm over the phone. What can I do for you? I need to ask you about something confidential. Margaret called me yesterday talking about revisiting our divorce settlement. She mentioned irregularities in asset disclosure. There was a pause. That's interesting timing. What do you mean? I received a call from a law firm in Colorado Springs yesterday. They're representing someone who claims to have new information about assets that weren't properly disclosed during your divorce proceedings. My stomach dropped. Did they mention Margaret specifically? Not by name, but they asked very specific questions about the timing of your father's trust fund establishment and the inheritance you received. Questions that only someone with detailed inside knowledge would know to ask. I gripped the phone tighter. Robert, I need to tell you something. I think my fiancée has been gathering information about my finances for months. I have evidence that she's been photographing documents and recording private conversations. Jesus, Patrick, are you sure? Completely sure. The question is whether she's working with Margaret to challenge the inheritance. Robert's voice became more serious. If that's true, we need to act quickly. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Bring whatever evidence you have. 2 hours later, I sat in Robert's downtown office, showing him the files Dave had copied from Claire's laptop. Robert's expression grew darker as he examined each document and listened to the audio recordings. This is systematic surveillance, he said finally. And given the timing of that call from the Colorado Springs firm, it's clearly connected to a legal strategy against you. But how could Margaret afford to hire a private investigator? She's been struggling financially for years. Robert leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. Patrick, there's something I never told you about your divorce settlement. Margaret tried to hire several law firms to challenge your father's inheritance, but nobody would take her case because it was clearly without merit. The trust was established after your separation, and the inheritance came years after the divorce was final. So why would anyone take her case now? Because now she has inside information. Documentation of your current assets, evidence of how you've managed the inheritance, proof of your lifestyle and spending patterns. With the right spin, a clever lawyer might be able to argue that the trust was always intended for you, which could create an argument for community property rights. I felt sick. Even though we've been divorced for 18 years, it's a long shot, but stranger things have happened in family court, especially if they can demonstrate that assets were concealed during the original proceedings. Robert pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. We need to figure out exactly what kind of arrangement Margaret has with your fiancé. Is Claire being paid for this information? Is she a licensed private investigator? And most importantly, what's their endgame? That evening, I came home to find Claire cooking dinner in our kitchen. She was making her specialty, chicken piccata, and the familiar smell should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like another performance in the elaborate deception she had been maintaining. "You're home early," she said, not looking up from the stove. "I thought you had a client meeting this afternoon." "Cancelled. How was your presentation?" "Really well. The Morrison account is basically ours." She turned to face me, and I noticed dark circles under her eyes. "Patrick, is everything okay? You've seemed distant the past couple of days." I studied her face, looking for any sign of guilt or deception. She appeared genuinely concerned, which made the betrayal feel even more devastating. "Just work stress, nothing to worry about." We sat down to dinner, and Claire seemed more relaxed than she had in days. She talked about her colleagues, shared office gossip, and asked about my construction projects. It felt almost normal, except for the recording device in my pocket and the knowledge that every word might be documented for someone else's benefit. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you ever met my ex-wife, Margaret?" Claire's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Margaret? No, why would I have met her?" "Just curious. She called me yesterday asking about the divorce settlement, made it sound like she had new information about my finances." "That's strange, after all these years." I watched Claire's reaction carefully. Her surprise seemed genuine, but I had learned not to trust my ability to read her anymore. "Yeah, very strange. My lawyer thinks she might be planning some kind of legal challenge." Claire set down her fork. "Can she do that? I mean, you've been divorced for almost 20 years. Probably not successfully, but people try desperate things when they're struggling financially." "Is she struggling?" The question felt loaded, though I couldn't pinpoint why. "As far as I know, she never remarried, works part-time as a substitute teacher. I can't imagine she has money to hire expensive lawyers." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe she found a lawyer who works on contingency?" "Maybe." After dinner, Claire went upstairs to take a bath, saying she needed to relax after her stressful presentation day. I waited until I heard the water running, then quietly moved to the small desk in our living room where Claire sometimes worked on her laptop in the evenings. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I needed to find some concrete connection between Claire and Margaret. The desk drawers were locked, which struck me as odd. In 3 years of living together, I had never known Claire to lock anything in our house. I went to my toolbox in the garage and found a small screwdriver that would work on the simple desk lock. My hands shook as I worked the mechanism, feeling like a criminal in my own home. The lock popped open after a few minutes of careful manipulation. Inside the top drawer, I found a manila folder labeled Research Notes. My heart pounded as I opened it. The folder contained printed emails, handwritten notes, and several business cards for law firms in Colorado Springs and Denver. but it was the letterhead on one document that made my blood run cold. Margaret Holloway, Consultation Notes. The document was dated 3 weeks ago and contained detailed information about my daily routine, my work schedule, and my financial habits. Below that was another document titled Asset Documentation Timeline with a list of items that needed to be photographed or recorded. Every item on the list corresponded to something I had seen in the files Dave had shown me: bank statements, insurance papers, property deeds, audio recordings of financial discussions. At the bottom of the folder was a business card for a law firm called Henderson & Associates, Family Law Specialists. Someone had written on the back in Claire's handwriting, "Consultation scheduled, discuss community property arguments and concealment claims." I photographed everything with my phone, my hands trembling so badly I had to take several shots to get clear images. Then I carefully replaced everything exactly as I had found it and relocked the drawer. When Claire came downstairs 20 minutes later, wrapped in her terry cloth robe with her hair in a towel, I was sitting on the couch watching television as if nothing had happened. "Feel better?" I asked. "Much." That bath was exactly what I needed. She curled up beside me on the couch. "What are you watching?" "Just the news." She rested her head on my shoulder, and I had to fight every instinct to pull away. The woman I had planned to marry, the person I had trusted with my most intimate thoughts and feelings, was actively working to destroy me financially. And she was doing it while playing the role of loving fiancé so convincingly that part of me still wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding. "Patrick." "Yeah?" "I love you." The words hit me like physical blows. "I love you too." It was the last lie I would tell her. The next morning I called Robert Chen before Claire woke up. "I found the connection," I told him, keeping my voice low. "Claire has been meeting with Margaret. I found consultation notes, meeting schedules, everything. Can you get me copies of those documents?" "I already photographed them. But Robert, there's something else. I think they're planning to claim that my father's trust was established as a way to hide assets during the divorce." "That's completely false." "I know that, and you know that. But if Claire has been gathering enough documentation about my current lifestyle and spending patterns, they might be able to create a convincing narrative that I've been living off hidden marital assets all these years." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Patrick, you need to be very careful here. If they're building a case, they might try to get you to say or do something that supports their theory. Don't sign anything, don't make any large financial transactions, and don't discuss your assets with anyone." "What about Claire?" "Keep acting normal until we figure out exactly what kind of legal action they're planning, but be aware that anything you say to her is probably being documented." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and watching Claire sleep through our bedroom doorway upstairs. She looked peaceful, innocent, nothing like someone who was orchestrating the systematic destruction of my financial security. But now I knew the truth. The woman I had trusted with my heart was working with my ex-wife to steal everything my father had worked to leave me. They had turned my own home into a surveillance operation, my most intimate moments into evidence against me. The betrayal was complete, but the fight was just beginning. The law offices of Henderson & Associates occupied the top floor of a glass building in Colorado Springs, about an hour south of Denver. I had called that morning, claiming to be interested in family law services, and managed to schedule a consultation under a false name. I needed to understand exactly what kind of case Margaret and Claire were building against me. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, led me to a conference room overlooking the mountains. "Mr. Henderson will be with you shortly," she said, offering coffee that I declined. My nerves were already stretched to their limit. James Henderson appeared 15 minutes later, a tall man in his 50s with the confident bearing of someone who had won more cases than he had lost. He settled into the chair across from me and opened a legal pad. "So, Mr. Williams," he said, using the fake name I had given, "you mentioned on the phone that you're dealing with a complex divorce situation involving hidden assets?" I had prepared a story that mirrored my own situation, but with enough changes to avoid suspicion. My wife and I divorced about 20 years ago. Recently, she's discovered that I inherited money from a family trust that was established while we were married, but she didn't know about it during the divorce proceedings. Henderson nodded, making notes. And she believes she has a claim to those assets now? She thinks so. The thing is, the trust was set up by my father after we had already separated, and I didn't receive any inheritance until years after the divorce was final. But the trust was technically established during the marriage? Yes, but I had no knowledge of it at the time and no access to the funds until much later. Henderson leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. That's an interesting case. Normally, assets acquired after separation aren't subject to division, but if we can demonstrate that the trust was always intended for you and that its existence was concealed during the original proceedings, there might be grounds for a claim. My stomach tightened. Even after 20 years? Colorado has specific statutes regarding fraud or concealment in divorce proceedings. If we can prove that assets were hidden or misrepresented, there's potential for reopening the settlement. Of course, we would need substantial evidence of the concealment and documentation of how those assets have been used since the divorce. What kind of evidence? Financial records, lifestyle documentation, proof that the hidden assets provided a standard of living that wouldn't have been possible with the disclosed income. Ideally, we'd want inside access to current financial information to build a comprehensive picture. I felt sick. This was exactly the strategy Margaret and Claire were pursuing, and Henderson was practically giving me their playbook. Has anyone ever successfully challenged a divorce settlement after this long? It's rare, but yes. Just last year, we reopened a 15-year-old divorce when the ex-wife proved her husband had hidden a trust fund worth over $800,000. She received a substantial settlement. Henderson leaned forward. The key is documentation. If your wife has detailed information about your current assets and lifestyle, and if she can demonstrate a pattern of concealment, she might have a viable case. I thanked Henderson and left his office with a clear understanding of the threat I was facing. Margaret and Claire weren't just gathering information for harassment purposes, they were building a legitimate legal case that could cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. On the drive back to Denver, I called Robert Chen. They're serious, I told him. I just spoke with Margaret's lawyer. They're planning to claim that my father's trust was a concealed marital asset, and they think they have enough evidence to reopen the divorce settlement. Based on what? Based on 3 years of surveillance by Claire. They have documentation of my lifestyle, my spending patterns, my current assets. Henderson thinks they might have a viable case. Robert's voice was grim. We need to get ahead of this. Can you come to my office this afternoon and bring your father's original estate documents, everything related to the trust establishment? 2 hours later, I sat in Robert's office while he reviewed my father's papers. The leather portfolio that had once represented security and stability now felt like evidence in my own defense. This is actually good news, Robert said finally. Your father was meticulous about documentation. Look at this. He showed me a letter my father had written to his estate attorney, dated 6 months after my separation from Margaret but before our divorce was finalized. He specifically states that he's establishing the trust in response to your divorce to ensure that his assets don't become part of any marital property division. He was protecting your inheritance from Margaret, not concealing it. Will that hold up in court? It should. Your father clearly established the trust after the marriage had ended in practice, even if not legally. And look at this. Robert pulled out another document. The trust was designed so that you couldn't access the principal until your 40th birthday. Margaret can't claim you were living off hidden assets when you had no access to them for most of the time since your divorce. I felt a flicker of hope. So their case is weak? Their legal case is weak, but that doesn't mean they can't cause serious damage. Even if they ultimately lose, the legal fees alone could cost you tens of thousands of dollars, and there's always the possibility that a sympathetic judge might find some merit in their arguments. Robert pulled out a fresh legal pad. We need to go on the offensive, document everything you know about Claire's surveillance, create a timeline of her deceptive behavior, and most importantly, we need to expose their collaboration before they can present themselves as innocent parties seeking justice. How do we do that? Very carefully. We need irrefutable proof that Claire was hired by Margaret specifically to gather evidence against you. If we can demonstrate that Margaret orchestrated this surveillance, it completely undermines their credibility. That evening, I returned home to find Claire in an unusually good mood. She was humming while she cooked dinner, and she seemed more relaxed than I had seen her in weeks. "Good day?" I asked, hanging my jacket in the hall closet. "Great day, really great." She turned from the stove with a bright smile. "The Morrison deal is officially ours, and my boss is talking about a promotion." "Congratulations." As we ate dinner, Claire seemed almost giddy with excitement. She talked about her future at the marketing firm, about potential raises and increased responsibilities. But underlying her enthusiasm, I detected something else, relief, as if some burden had been lifted from her shoulders. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you happy with our engagement? I mean, really happy?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Of course I'm happy. Why would you ask that?" "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like you're holding something back from me." Claire reached across the table and took my hand. "Patrick, I love you. I can't wait to be your wife." But as she said it, I noticed her eyes flicking toward her phone, which had been buzzing with messages throughout dinner. "Popular tonight," I observed. "Just work stuff, you know how it is." After dinner, Claire excused herself to make some phone calls related to her promotion discussion. I used the opportunity to retrieve the recording device Dave had given me and hide it in the living room where Claire often took her private calls. 20 minutes later, she came downstairs and settled into her favorite chair with her phone. I retreated to the kitchen but stayed close enough to ensure the recording device would pick up her conversation. "It's done," I heard her say. "The consultation went well today, and Henderson thinks we have a strong case." My blood ran cold. She was talking to someone about the legal consultation. "No, Patrick doesn't suspect anything." The laptop repair scared me for a few days, but the technician didn't mention finding anything unusual. There was a pause while the other person spoke. "Margaret, I know this has been difficult for both of us, but we're almost finished. Henderson wants to file the paperwork next week." "Margaret." Claire was talking directly to my ex-wife. "I have copies of everything, bank statements, property records, insurance documents, even recordings of our private conversations about money. Henderson said it's more than enough to prove concealment." Another pause. "The engagement ring alone is worth $15,000. Combined with the house improvements and the vacation spending, we can demonstrate that he's been living well beyond his disclosed income for years." I felt nauseous. They were using my gifts to Claire, my investments in our shared life, as evidence that I had been hiding assets from Margaret. "I know this is awkward, but it's almost over. Once the settlement is finalized, we can both move on with our lives." Settlement. They were already talking about a settlement as if it were a foregone conclusion. "No, I can't keep doing this much longer. Living with him every day, pretending to love him, it's getting harder. But Henderson said we need just a few more weeks to finalize the documentation." The words hit me like physical blows. She was finding it difficult to pretend to love me. Our entire relationship, everything I thought we had built together, was an elaborate deception designed to gather evidence for Margaret's legal case. "I'll call you tomorrow after I get the final bank statements copied. And Margaret, thank you for giving me this opportunity. The money you're paying me has really helped with my student loans." Money. Margaret was paying Claire to spy on me, to live with me, to pretend to be my fiancé while systematically documenting everything that could be used against me in court. Claire ended the call and returned to the kitchen where I was pretending to clean dishes. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Perfect. Just touching base with a colleague about tomorrow's projects." She kissed my cheek and headed upstairs. "I'm exhausted. Going to bed early tonight." I waited until I heard the bedroom door close, then retrieved the recording device. The conversation I had just overheard was clear and damning. Claire wasn't just gathering information for Margaret, she was being paid to do it. Our entire relationship was a business arrangement designed to defraud me of my inheritance. But now I had proof, and tomorrow I would start building my own case. The war was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a weapon to fight back. I spent 3 sleepless days preparing for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation of my life. Robert Chen had helped me organize all the evidence. The recording of Claire's phone call with Margaret, the photographs of the documents from her desk, and the files Dave had recovered from her laptop. We had built an airtight case proving that Claire had been hired to conduct surveillance against me, but I needed more than evidence. I needed a confession that would completely destroy their legal strategy. Robert had advised against confronting Claire directly. "Let the lawyers handle this," he said. "Don't give them any ammunition to claim you intimidated or threatened her." But I couldn't let this continue. Every day I spent living with Claire, pretending our relationship was real, felt like another violation. She was sleeping beside me each night while planning to take everything my father had worked to leave me. The betrayal was eating me alive. On Thursday evening, I made my decision. Claire was working late at the office, supposedly preparing for another client presentation. I used the time to set up recording equipment in multiple locations throughout our house. If she was going to continue documenting our private conversations, I would return the favor. When Claire came home at 8:30, I was sitting at our kitchen table with a glass of wine and a folder containing printouts of all the evidence I had gathered. "Hey, honey," she said, dropping her purse by the door. "Sorry I'm so late. The Morrison presentation is turning into a monster project. Claire, we need to talk." Something in my voice must have alerted her because she stopped in the doorway, studying my expression. "Is everything okay?" "Sit down." She hesitated, then moved to the chair across from me. I noticed her glancing at the folder, trying to read the documents that were partially visible. "I know about Margaret," I said quietly. Claire's face went pale, but she kept her voice steady. "What about Margaret?" "I know about the money she's paying you. I know about Henderson and Associates. I know about the surveillance you've been conducting for the past 8 months. For a moment, Claire said nothing. She sat perfectly still, as if calculating her next move. Then she let out a shaky breath. "Patrick, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. But first, I want you to hear something." I pulled out my phone and played the recording of her conversation with Margaret from 2 nights earlier. As her own voice filled our kitchen, discussing how difficult it was to pretend to love me, Claire's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "Oh, God," she whispered, covering her face with her hands. "Living with him every day, pretending to love him, it's getting harder," I quoted. "Those were your exact words, Claire." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Patrick, please let me explain. It's not what it sounds like." "Then explain." Claire wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "Margaret approached me about 6 months before we met. She said you had hidden assets from her during the divorce, that she deserved a share of your father's inheritance. She offered me $25,000 to get close to you and document your financial situation. The casual way she admitted to being paid to seduce me felt like another slap. And you agreed? I needed the money. My student loans were crushing me, and my job barely covered my expenses. $25,000 seemed like enough to change my life. So our entire relationship was a business transaction? Claire shook her head frantically. No, that's not true. At first, yes, it was just about the money. But Patrick, I fell in love with you. Everything between us became real. I studied her face, looking for any sign of sincerity. If you fell in love with me, why did you continue gathering evidence? Why didn't you tell Margaret the deal was off? Because I was scared. Margaret said if I backed out, she'd expose what I had already done. She'd tell you everything, ruin my career, maybe even file criminal charges for invasion of privacy. So you chose to keep betraying me rather than face the consequences of what you'd already done. Claire reached across the table toward my hand, but I pulled away. Patrick, I was trapped. I wanted to tell you the truth so many times, but I didn't know how. You could have started by not recording our private conversations about money. You could have stopped photographing my personal documents. You could have refused to help Margaret build a case against me. I know it was wrong." Claire's voice broke. "But by then I was in too deep. Margaret had evidence that I'd been spying on you. She could have destroyed my life." I opened the folder and pulled out copies of the consultation notes I'd found in her desk. "Tell me about Henderson and Associates." Claire stared at the papers, her face going white again. "How did you find those?" "That's not important. What's important is that you and Margaret are planning to file a legal challenge next week claiming that my father's trust was a concealed marital asset." "Margaret is planning that. I'm just providing information." "Information you gathered by lying to me for almost a year. Claire, do you understand what you've done? You've turned our entire relationship into evidence for a fraudulent lawsuit." Claire broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. "I never wanted it to go this far. I thought Margaret just wanted proof that you were doing well financially. I didn't know she was planning a lawsuit until a few weeks ago. But you continued helping her. What choice did I have? She already had everything she needed. Walking away wouldn't have changed anything." I leaned back in my chair, feeling emotionally drained. Part of me wanted to believe that Claire's feelings for me had been genuine, but her actions spoke louder than her words. "Claire, I need you to understand something. The legal case you've helped Margaret build is based on false premises. My father specifically established that trust after Margaret and I separated to protect my inheritance from exactly this kind of claim. We have documented proof of his intentions." Claire looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean Margaret's lawsuit is going to fail. She's not going to get a penny of my inheritance, and she's going to face serious legal consequences for orchestrating this surveillance scheme." "But Henderson said the case was strong." "Henderson was telling Margaret what she wanted to hear to get her to pay his retainer fees. Any competent family law attorney would have explained that her claim has no merit." Claire stared at me in growing horror. "Are you saying this was all for nothing?" "I'm saying you destroyed our relationship and committed multiple crimes to help Margaret pursue a case that was doomed from the beginning." We sat in silence for several minutes. Claire continued crying softly while I tried to process the enormity of what she had done to us. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "That depends on you." "What do you mean?" I pulled out a legal document that Robert had prepared. "This is a sworn affidavit detailing everything you just told me about Margaret hiring you to conduct surveillance. If you sign it, it will completely destroy her legal case and protect me from any future claims." Claire read through the document, her hands shaking. "If I sign this, Margaret will know I betrayed her." "You already betrayed her when you fell in love with me, and you betrayed me when you continued helping her even after you claimed to love me. Now you have to choose which betrayal you're willing to live with." "What if I refuse to sign?" "Then I'll turn over all the evidence I've gathered to the police and let them decide whether to file charges for invasion of privacy, wiretapping, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Margaret will still lose her lawsuit, but you'll both face criminal prosecution." Claire stared at the affidavit for a long time. "If I sign this, what happens to us?" The question broke my heart because I could hear genuine pain in her voice. Despite everything she had done, I believe she did develop real feelings for me. But those feelings weren't enough to overcome the magnitude of her betrayal. "There is no us anymore, Claire. You made sure of that when you chose to prioritize Margaret's threats over your supposed love for me." She nodded slowly, tears still streaming down her face. I know I ruined everything." Claire picked up the pen and signed the affidavit. As she wrote her name, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I finally had the evidence I needed to protect myself, and sadness that the woman I had planned to marry was capable of such calculated deception. "I'll pack my things tonight," she said quietly. "I think that's best." As Claire headed upstairs to gather her belongings, I sat alone in our kitchen surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. The house that had once felt like a home now felt like a crime scene where my trust had been murdered. But for the first time in weeks, I also felt something else. Freedom. The elaborate deception was finally over. The surveillance had ended. The threat to my inheritance was neutralized. Tomorrow I would face the aftermath of this nightmare. Tonight I would begin the process of reclaiming my life. An hour later, Claire came downstairs with 2 suitcases and a box of personal items. She paused at the front door, looking back at me with tears in her eyes. "Patrick, I really did love you. That part was real." I met her gaze, feeling nothing but emptiness. "I know you think that's true, Claire, but real love doesn't involve recording someone's private conversations and photographing their personal documents. What you felt might have been genuine, but it wasn't love." She nodded, understanding that there was nothing left to say. "I'm sorry. For everything." After she left, I walked through our house, turning off the recording equipment I had installed. The silence was profound, almost sacred. For the first time in months, I was truly alone, with no one watching, no one listening, no one gathering evidence against me. I poured myself a whiskey and sat on my father's old leather chair in the living room, holding the signed affidavit that would end Margaret's legal challenge before it began. Tomorrow, Robert would file the necessary paperwork to protect my inheritance permanently. But tonight I would simply sit in my own house in complete privacy and begin to heal from the deepest betrayal I had ever experienced. 3 months after Claire walked out of my life, I stood in Robert Chen's office watching him file the last of the legal documents that would forever protect my inheritance from Margaret's fraudulent claims. The sworn affidavit Claire had signed had been devastating to their case. Henderson and Associates had withdrawn as Margaret's counsel within days of receiving it, and no other attorney would touch her claim. "It's over," Robert said, closing the file folder. "Margaret's case is officially dismissed with prejudice, meaning she can never file this type of claim again. The court also issued a restraining order preventing any future harassment related to your father's estate." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. For months I had lived with the constant threat of losing everything my father had worked to leave me. Now, finally, that threat was gone. What about the criminal charges against Claire? The district attorney decided not to prosecute. Since she cooperated fully and Margaret was clearly the architect of the scheme, they're treating her as more of a victim than a co-conspirator. She did face some consequences, though. Her employer terminated her when they learned about the surveillance activities. I nodded. Part of me felt sorry for Claire, despite everything she had done to me. She had made terrible choices, but she had also been manipulated by Margaret's desperation and false promises. And Margaret? Robert's expression grew more serious. "She's facing multiple charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, invasion of privacy, and witness tampering. Henderson also filed a complaint with the state bar alleging that she misrepresented facts to obtain legal representation. She's looking at potential jail time and significant financial penalties." "She brought it on herself." "Yes, she did. Patrick, you should also know that Margaret attempted to contact you several times through my office. She wants to apologize and discuss a settlement to avoid trial." I shook my head. "I'm not interested in hearing from her ever again. She made her choices 18 years ago when we divorced, and she made them again when she hired Claire to spy on me. I don't owe her forgiveness or settlement negotiations." Robert smiled. "I thought you'd say that. I'll make sure her attorney understands that all communication should go through my office." As I left Robert's building and walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine peace. The constant anxiety about being watched and recorded was gone. The fear of losing my financial security had evaporated. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could simply live my life without looking over my shoulder. That evening I did something I hadn't done since discovering Claire's betrayal, or friends over for dinner. Dave Rodriguez from TechFix and his wife Maria joined me for steaks on my back patio. It felt good to have honest conversation and genuine laughter filling my house again. "How are you holding up?" Dave asked as we sat around the outdoor fire pit after dinner. This whole situation must have been incredibly difficult. It was, I admitted, but in some ways, I think it was necessary. I learned things about myself and about trust that I needed to learn. Maria leaned forward. Like what? I thought about her question for a moment, watching the flames dance in the fire pit. I learned that I have better instincts than I gave myself credit for. Deep down, I knew something was wrong with Claire long before I found the evidence. I just didn't trust myself enough to act on those feelings. And now? Now I trust my own judgment. I won't ignore red flags or make excuses for behavior that doesn't feel right. Dave nodded approvingly. That's a valuable lesson, even if it came at a high cost. It did come at a high cost, but you know what? I'm grateful for what happened. Both Dave and Maria looked surprised. I'm grateful because I learned who Claire really was before I married her. Imagine if I'd discovered all this after we'd been married for several years, maybe with children involved. The betrayal would have been even more devastating, and the legal complications would have been nightmare. You really see it as a blessing in disguise? Maria asked. I do. My father left me that inheritance to give me freedom and security. If I'd married Claire, I would have been sharing my life with someone who was fundamentally dishonest and manipulative. That's not freedom. That's not security. That's a prison disguised as a partnership. We talked until late into the evening, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The laughter was genuine, the conversation was honest, and nobody was recording anything for evidence in a legal case. After Dave and Maria left, I walked through my house, turning off lights and setting the security system. Every room felt different now that I knew I was truly alone. The paranoia was gone, replaced by a sense of sanctuary that I had almost forgotten was possible. In my bedroom, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was the engagement ring I had given Claire, a 2-carat sapphire surrounded by diamonds that had cost me $15,000. She had returned it the night she moved out, placing it on the kitchen counter without a word. For weeks the ring had sat in my drawer like a monument to my poor judgment. But looking at it now, I felt something different. Instead of representing failure, it represented survival. I had escaped a relationship that would have destroyed me financially and emotionally. Tomorrow I would return the ring to the jeweler. The money from its sale would go into my father's trust, adding to the legacy he had worked so hard to preserve. The next morning I woke up naturally for the first time in months without the anxiety that had been plaguing my sleep. I made coffee, read the newspaper on my back patio, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of being alone with my thoughts. Around noon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something prompted me to answer. Patrick, this is Sarah Mitchell. I hope you remember me. Sarah Mitchell. We had dated briefly about 5 years ago before I met Claire. Sarah was a veterinarian who owned her own practice, a kind and intelligent woman I had liked very much but hadn't pursued seriously because I hadn't felt ready for a committed relationship at the time. Sarah, of course I remember you. How are you? I'm well, thank you. Patrick, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I heard through mutual friends that your engagement ended. I wanted to reach out and see how you're doing. I smiled, touched by her concern. I'm doing much better than I expected, actually. It was the right decision, even though it was painful at the time. I'm glad to hear that. Listen, I know this might be forward of me, but would you be interested in having coffee sometime? I'd love to catch up and hear how you've been. The invitation caught me off guard, but in a pleasant way. I'd like that very much. We made plans to meet the following weekend at a cafe downtown. After we hung up, I realized that for the first time since Claire had left, I was looking forward to spending time with someone new, someone who had no hidden agenda, no ulterior motives, no connection to my past mistakes or my family's money. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I hadn't visited his grave in over a year, partly because I had been so busy with work and wedding planning, and partly because the recent events had made me feel like I had somehow failed to honor his memory. His headstone was simple: Thomas Holloway, loving father and provider. I sat on the small bench nearby and told him about everything that had happened, about Margaret's scheme, about Claire's betrayal, about how close I had come to losing everything he had worked to leave me. "But it's okay now, Dad," I said aloud, feeling only slightly self-conscious about talking to his grave. "The inheritance is protected. The legacy you built is safe. And I finally understand what you meant when you said money gives you choices. You gave me the choice to walk away from people who only wanted to use me." A gentle breeze rustled the trees overhead, and I felt a sense of closure that had been missing for months. My father's gift to me wasn't just financial security. It was the freedom to demand honesty and respect in my relationships, knowing that I didn't need anyone else's approval or support to survive. As I drove home from the cemetery, I made a mental list of the changes I wanted to make in my life. I would be more selective about who I trusted with personal information. I would pay attention to my instincts when something felt wrong. I would value authenticity over convenience in my relationships. Most importantly, I would never again confuse loneliness with love or mistake companionship for genuine partnership. That evening I cooked dinner for myself and ate it at my kitchen table while reading a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. The silence in my house was complete and peaceful. Nobody was recording my conversation because there was nobody else there to talk to. Nobody was photographing my documents because nobody else had access to my private spaces. For the first time in almost a year, I was completely and utterly free. Later, as I prepared for bed, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and realized that the man staring back at me was stronger than the one who had discovered Claire's betrayal 3 months ago. The experience had been devastating, but it had also been educational. I now knew exactly what I would and wouldn't accept in a relationship. I also knew that I didn't need to be in a relationship to be complete. My father's inheritance had given me financial independence, but the events of the past year had given me something even more valuable: emotional independence. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I felt grateful for the first time since this ordeal began. Grateful for Dave Rodriguez's honesty in showing me the surveillance files. Grateful for Robert Chen's legal expertise in protecting my inheritance. Grateful for my father's foresight in establishing a trust that couldn't be challenged successfully. And strangely grateful for Margaret's scheme, because it had revealed Claire's true character before I made the irreversible mistake of marrying her. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities. Maybe I would call Sarah and see if she wanted to move our coffee date to dinner. Maybe I would finally take the European vacation I'd been postponing for years. Maybe I would simply enjoy another peaceful day in my own home, surrounded by the security my father had worked so hard to provide. Whatever tomorrow brought, I would face it as a free man, with my integrity intact and my future secure. The nightmare was over, and the rest of my life could finally begin.